The restaurant buzzed softly with the hum of quiet conversations, the clinking of glasses, and the aroma of roasted garlic and butter melting over fresh bread. It was one of those upscale places where everyone spoke in low tones, pretending to be more important than they really were. Among the staff rushing around in crisp uniforms was a young waitress named Emma. She wasn't new to hard work. Life had taught her the meaning of struggle far too early, but she carried herself with quiet grace. Her smile, though small, could light up the dullest day, and she treated every customer with the same respect, whether they were kind or cruel. That night, however, felt different. There was a strange weight in the air, as if fate was quietly arranging something monumental. The manager's voice cut through the dining room, announcing the arrival of a VIP guest. Table 7. Mr. Jonathan Hayes. "Make sure everything is perfect," he whispered urgently. Everyone straightened up. Jonathan Hayes wasn't just any man. He was one of the most powerful billionaires in the city, known for his fortune, influence, and reputation for being impossible to please. When Emma approached his table with her notepad, she noticed him immediately. His cold gaze, the tailored suit that probably cost more than her yearly rent, and the way he barely acknowledged her presence. "Good evening, sir," she said softly, her voice steady but warm. He didn't look up, just muttered, "Sparkling water. No lemon." The tone was sharp, dismissive. Emma smiled anyway. She had dealt with worse. But something about him made her uneasy. There was a strange familiarity in his eyes, though she couldn't explain why. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and she felt an odd tightening in her chest, as if her heart recognized something her mind couldn't. She quickly looked away, telling herself it was nothing. Still, that unsettling feeling wouldn't leave her. Across the table, Jonathan couldn't help but glance up once more. There was something about the young woman's face, her expression, her manner, that tugged at a buried memory he had long tried to forget. He frowned, shaking it off. He had no patience for distractions, especially tonight. As the evening went on, the tension between them grew silently. Every time Emma approached his table, Jonathan seemed more irritated, more distant. At one point, his sharp words made another waitress flinch, but Emma simply lowered her gaze and apologized, though she had done nothing wrong. Behind that calm exterior, she wondered what could make a man so cold. What neither of them knew was that their connection ran far deeper than a simple customer and waitress. Years ago, a desperate young woman had left her newborn daughter at a hospital doorstep, haunted by choices she could never undo. That woman had built an empire, buried her past, and told herself she'd never look back. And now, unknowingly, she was sitting across from that same child, grown, humble, and serving her dinner. As Emma placed the final plate on the table, Jonathan's gaze lingered on her face a second too long. Something flickered in his expression. Confusion, pain, maybe even guilt. And in that quiet, suspended moment, both their lives were about to change forever. They just didn't know it yet. The rest of the night passed in quiet unease. Emma moved from table to table, pretending not to notice how the billionaire's eyes followed her every now and then. Each time she approached, his expression softened just a little, confusion written across his face as if he were looking at a ghost. But when she looked back, he quickly returned to his usual coldness, giving clipped orders and keeping his tone firm. Still, something about her seemed to unsettle him deeply. Emma didn't understand it either. There was no reason she should feel so nervous around a man she had never met. Yet, there was a strange pull, an unspoken familiarity that made her heart beat faster. She brushed it off as nerves. After all, it wasn't every day she served someone as powerful as Jonathan Hayes. To her, he was just another reminder of a world she would never belong to, a world of wealth and privilege, far from her small apartment and the quiet loneliness she returned to after every long shift. But that night fate had other plans. Later, during her short break, Emma sat behind the restaurant near the dumpsters, unwrapping a sandwich she had packed from home. The air was cool, carrying the distant hum of city life. Her phone buzzed, a message from her best friend Lily, asking how her shift was going. "Long and tiring," Emma typed back. Rich guy at table 7 is making everyone nervous. She added a laughing emoji, trying to make light of it. But deep down, she felt an ache she couldn't name. Inside, Jonathan sat alone, swirling his glass of wine but not drinking. His mind drifted back to a time he had spent decades trying to forget. He remembered being young and terrified, holding a baby girl in his arms. He remembered the hospital lights, the crying, the decision he thought would destroy him, but had instead hardened him. That baby was gone. At least, that's what he had told himself all these years. He closed his eyes and took a slow breath, but the image of Emma's face wouldn't leave him. There was something hauntingly familiar about her eyes, gentle yet strong. The same eyes he had seen in the mirror of his past mistakes. As the dinner rush ended, Emma approached Jonathan's table with his bill. "I hope everything was fine, sir," she said, her voice polite, though her feet ached and her body longed to rest. Jonathan looked up at her, and for the first time, he truly smiled, a faint, almost painful curve of his lips. "It was fine," he said quietly. His voice carried a strange softness now, one that surprised both of them. Emma nodded and took the signed bill. As she turned to leave, Jonathan's voice stopped her. "What's your name?" he asked. She paused, glancing back. "Emma," she said simply. He repeated it under his breath as if testing the sound. "Emma." The name hit him like a wave, unlocking something he had buried long ago. But before he could say anything more, his phone buzzed. His assistant's voice came through, urgent, reminding him of an early morning meeting. Jonathan gathered his things quickly and left without another word. Emma stood by the door watching him go. She didn't know why, but a strange sadness washed over her. It felt like she had just lost something she never knew she had. Outside, Jonathan's car disappeared into the city lights, but his thoughts stayed behind, with the waitress who unknowingly carried the one truth he had spent a lifetime running from. Something inside him whispered that this wasn't the last time he'd see her. And deep down, neither of them realized that the past they both thought was gone was about to come crashing back into their lives in ways neither could imagine. The following morning, Emma woke to the sound of rain tapping against her window. The city felt quieter than usual, almost heavy with something unspoken. She sat up in her small apartment, clutching a cup of coffee between her hands. Her mind kept wandering back to the man from last night, the billionaire with the distant eyes and the strange way he had looked at her. There was something about him she couldn't shake off, something that felt personal, though she couldn't explain why. She tried to focus on her day ahead, but his face kept appearing in her thoughts. At the same time across town, Jonathan sat in his penthouse office, staring out at the skyline. Papers were scattered across his desk, but his mind wasn't on business. He had spent the night replaying every moment of his dinner, the sound of her voice, the way she smiled, and most of all her name, Emma. It wasn't a common coincidence. His lost daughter's name had been Emma too. The child he had given up when life had fallen apart, when he was too young and too scared to take responsibility. He told himself it was impossible. Yet, a quiet voice in his mind wouldn't stop whispering, "What if?" He called his assistant. "Find out everything you can about a waitress named Emma at La Belle Bistro," he said. His tone cold but edged with a tremor he didn't want to admit. The assistant hesitated for a moment but nodded. Jonathan hung up, leaning back in his chair. He had spent his life controlling everything: money, power, success, but this feeling of not knowing terrified him. Meanwhile, Emma continued her day as usual. Between serving tables and managing endless orders, she confided in Lily during a short break. "It's strange," she said, staring into her coffee. "That man from last night. I don't know, it's like I've seen him before. He just felt familiar." Lily raised an eyebrow. "Maybe you've seen him in the news. He's a billionaire, right?" Emma nodded but looked unconvinced. "Maybe," she said softly, though her heart told her otherwise. Later that week, Jonathan returned to the restaurant unannounced. The staff scrambled to prepare, whispering nervously. Emma froze when she saw him walk in. Their eyes met again, and once more, that same strange feeling washed over both of them. He requested her table, insisting only she serve him. The room felt smaller, heavier. As she took his order, Jonathan studied her face closely, the way her hands trembled slightly when writing, the way her smile faltered under pressure. She reminded him too much of someone he used to know, someone from a life he thought he'd buried forever. After dinner, he tried to make small talk, asking about her life, where she grew up, if she had family. Emma answered cautiously. "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly. "Never knew my real parents. I guess they had their reasons." Her voice was steady, but her eyes glimmered with something fragile. Jonathan's chest tightened. Every word she said cut deeper. He wanted to tell her everything right there, to admit who he was, to apologize for the years she'd spent wondering. But fear held him back. He left the restaurant once again without saying a word, guilt pressing on him like a weight he could no longer ignore. For the first time in years, the man who could buy anything felt powerless. That night, as Emma cleaned the empty tables, she found a small card left behind. It bore Jonathan Hayes's name and a handwritten note. "We need to talk." Her hands trembled as she read it. She didn't know what it meant or why he wanted to see her again, but deep down, she sensed this was the beginning of something that would change everything she thought she knew about her life, and about herself. Emma couldn't sleep that night. The note from Jonathan Hayes lay on her kitchen table, its clean white paper almost glowing in the dim light. She read the words over and over, "We need to talk." They seemed harmless, yet heavy, carrying an unspoken urgency that made her heart race. Why would a billionaire want to talk to her? She wasn't anyone important, just a waitress struggling to pay rent and keep her life together. Still, something deep inside whispered that this wasn't about business or chance. It was something else, something personal. By morning, curiosity won over fear. She decided to meet him. The card had his office address printed neatly at the bottom, a tall glass tower downtown that touched the clouds. She stood outside for several minutes before walking in, her palms sweating. Everything inside gleamed, marble floors, gold accents, and the quiet hum of money. The receptionist smiled politely and directed her to the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, Jonathan was already waiting. He looked different this time, not cold or arrogant, but tense, like a man carrying a secret too heavy to hide. "Emma!" he greeted softly. She nodded, unsure what to say. He gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." The silence between them was thick. Jonathan looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You remind me of someone," he said finally, his voice almost breaking. "Someone I lost a long time ago." Emma frowned slightly. "Your daughter?" she asked, remembering a magazine article she once read about him. He froze. The question hit too close. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "My daughter." Her name was Emma too. The coincidence made her shift uneasily in her seat. "That's strange," she murmured. "Same name, same city." Her attempt to smile didn't hide her growing unease. Jonathan studied her carefully. Every small detail, the curve of her smile, the faint dimple on her cheek, the way her eyes held both warmth and sadness, it all matched the memory of the baby he once held. His chest tightened with guilt. He wanted to tell her the truth, but he was afraid she would walk out and never come back. Instead, he asked more questions, about her childhood, her life in foster care, her dreams. Every answer she gave drew invisible threads between their past and present. The more she spoke, the more certain he became. But he needed proof. Something undeniable. After she left his office, shaken and confused, Jonathan made a quiet call. "I need a DNA test," he said. His voice was steady, but his heart wasn't. Meanwhile, Emma walked through the city streets in a daze. Something about that meeting felt wrong. Not in a dangerous way, but in a deeply emotional one. There was sadness in his eyes when he looked at her, almost like he was holding back years of regret. She couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she pulled out an old envelope from her drawer, the only thing she had from her early years. Inside was a hospital bracelet, faintly marked with a name she could barely read. Emma H. Her breath caught. Could it be? The next day, Jonathan's assistant arrived quietly at the restaurant, saying his boss wanted to see her again, urgently. Emma hesitated but agreed. When she entered his office this time, the atmosphere was different. He was standing by the window, his hands clenched, a small envelope on the desk in front of him. He turned slowly, his face pale but determined. "Emma," he said softly, "there's something I have to tell you." Her pulse quickened. The room suddenly felt smaller. The air was thick with the weight of something she wasn't ready to hear. Every instinct told her that whatever came next would change everything. Jonathan took a slow step forward, his voice trembling as he whispered, "You're not just someone I met by chance." Emma froze, her breath caught in her throat, as the truth hovered between them, close enough to touch, yet just out of reach. Emma stared at him, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it echo in the room. "What do you mean by that?" she asked carefully, her voice trembling. Jonathan opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, the office door burst open. A woman in a sleek gray suit walked in, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. It was Victoria Grant, Jonathan's longtime business partner, and, as rumors often whispered, the person who knew more about his past than anyone else. She froze when she saw Emma. For a split second, her confident expression faltered, replaced by shock. "You found her," she whispered, her tone a strange mix of disbelief and fear. Emma looked between them, confused. "Found who?" she asked, but neither answered right away. The tension was suffocating. Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Victoria, this isn't your concern," he said sharply. But Victoria shook her head, stepping closer. "You can't just tell her," she said under her breath. "Not yet. You don't even know what she's been told." Emma's pulse quickened. "What's going on? What are you both hiding from me?" Her voice cracked with a mix of fear and anger. Jonathan hesitated, but before he could speak, Victoria turned to Emma. "You were never supposed to meet him," she said quietly. "We made sure of that." Emma felt the room tilt. "What do you mean we?" she demanded. Victoria's face paled. Jonathan looked furious now. "You did this?" he asked, his voice shaking. "You're the reason she disappeared." Victoria looked at him helplessly. "I did what I had to. You were falling apart back then, Jonathan. You weren't ready to raise a child. The board was worried. They thought it would ruin your career, your reputation. I made arrangements for her to be adopted by a good family, but something went wrong." Emma's knees went weak. She gripped the back of a chair, trying to steady herself. "So, you both knew about me?" Her voice was small now, almost childlike. Jonathan shook his head quickly. "No, Emma. I didn't. Thought you were safe. I didn't know you ended up in foster care." His voice broke as guilt filled his eyes. "If I had known, I would have found you years ago." But Emma wasn't listening anymore. The world felt distant, muffled, as if she were trapped in a fog of disbelief. She turned toward the door, needing air, needing space to breathe. But Victoria's voice stopped her. "There's more you don't understand," she said urgently. "You're not the only one who's been looking for answers." Jonathan frowned. "What are you talking about?" Victoria hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Someone else knows about her. Someone from the past. They've been asking questions, digging into the records of that adoption. I thought it was just curiosity, but now, I think they want something." The words hit Jonathan like ice. "Who?" he demanded. Victoria shook her head. "I don't know. But whoever it is, they know about the connection between you and Emma. And they're not happy it's coming out." Emma looked up, fear flashing in her eyes. Why would anyone care about that? Victoria glanced at her, then at Jonathan. "Because if the truth about what happened all those years ago gets out, it won't just destroy your family. It'll destroy everything connected to it." The room fell silent. The rain outside had turned into a storm, echoing against the windows. Jonathan's expression hardened as he realized the gravity of what she meant. Emma stood frozen, torn between disbelief and fear. She had walked into that office expecting answers. Instead, she found herself caught in something far bigger. A secret buried deep within powerful hands, a past that refused to stay forgotten. And somewhere out there, someone was already moving closer, ready to make sure the truth never saw the light of day. Thunder rolled outside as the storm raged on, shaking the tall windows of Jonathan's office. Emma stood frozen between the two people who had just turned her world upside down. The air was thick with truth, guilt, and fear. Jonathan finally stepped forward, his voice unsteady but firm. "Emma, you deserve to know everything," he said. "You are my daughter. I didn't abandon you. I was told you were gone." Emma's breath caught. For a moment the world seemed to stop. Every unanswered question of her life, why she was alone, why no one came back for her, suddenly had a face. She wanted to speak, to cry, to scream, but no words came. Her hands trembled as she looked into the eyes of the man who had unknowingly changed her life. Before she could respond, the elevator chimed. Another figure stepped out, tall, dark coat dripping from the rain. Victoria's face went pale. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. The man smiled faintly. "It's been a long time, Victoria." He turned his gaze toward Jonathan. "And you too, old friend." Jonathan stiffened. "Nathan Cole," he said bitterly. Emma looked between them in confusion. "Who is he?" she asked. "Nathan was my partner before Victoria," Jonathan said carefully. "Years ago we started the company together. But when things went wrong, he disappeared." Nathan stepped closer, his voice calm but cold. "Wrong," he said, almost amused. "You mean when you covered up the truth? You remember, don't you, Jonathan? The deal, the money, the accident." Emma frowned. "What accident?" Nathan's smile faded. "The night you were born," he said softly. "Your mother, Jonathan's wife, didn't die from illness like the news said. It was a car crash. One caused by Jonathan rushing to sign a deal that would save his company. He walked away with scratches. She didn't." Jonathan's face went white. "That's not true," he whispered. "It was an accident, I didn't mean." Nathan cut him off. "Intentions don't erase guilt. You hid it, Jonathan. You buried your wife's death under lies, and when your daughter reminded you too much of her, you let Victoria handle the situation." The words sliced through the room like glass. Emma's chest tightened. "You're saying he knew?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan turned toward her, eyes filled with regret. "No, Emma. I didn't know what Victoria had done. But yes, I made mistakes. I was young, foolish, desperate to hold my empire together. I thought I could rebuild later. I never did." Tears filled Emma's eyes. The anger, the confusion, the longing, all of it crashed over her like a wave. "You both ruined everything," she whispered. "And for what? Money? Power?" Victoria looked away, ashamed. Nathan's expression softened. "You see now why I came back," he said quietly. "You deserve to know the truth. But there's something else you need to hear." He turned to Jonathan. "I wasn't the only one who knew. The media got wind of it. They're publishing the story tomorrow. Everything, your wife, your daughter, the lies. It's over." Jonathan staggered back, realization dawning. His empire, his reputation, everything was about to collapse. But for the first time in years, he didn't care. He looked at Emma and said quietly, "Maybe it's time it all came out. Maybe the truth is the only thing that can fix what's left." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Her heart was torn between the pain of what she had learned and the faint, fragile spark of something that still connected them, something real. As Nathan turned to leave, lightning flashed across the glass, illuminating the room in a white glow. "You can rebuild from the truth or keep running from it," he said before disappearing into the storm. Jonathan and Emma stood in silence. The lies that had separated them for decades were gone, leaving only the raw truth behind. And as dawn began to break through the clouds, Emma finally whispered, "Maybe we can start again, not as strangers but as what we were always meant to be." But just as Jonathan nodded, a phone on his desk buzzed with a new message. He glanced down, his face going pale once more. On the screen was a single line. "You think it's over. But you have no idea who really took her." Emma saw the fear in his eyes and felt her heart stop. The storm outside had calmed, but inside, a new one had just begun. Jonathan's hands trembled as he read the message again, the words glowing on the screen like a ghost refusing to rest. "You have no idea who really took her." His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. "Who could have sent this?" he whispered. Emma stood beside him, confusion written across her face. "What does it mean?" "I thought Victoria arranged the adoption." Victoria, still shaken, looked up slowly. "I did, but someone else interfered. Someone higher up on the board. They wanted to keep your disappearance quiet, Emma, because the story of Jonathan's family tragedy could have ruined the company's image back then." Her voice cracked as she added, "I was told it was handled, but I never knew where you were taken." Jonathan clenched his fists. "So, it wasn't just you. It was a cover-up." He sank into his chair, the weight of the past finally too much to carry. Emma looked at him, not as the billionaire everyone admired, but as a broken man who had finally run out of excuses. The empire he had built had been paid for with silence, and now the truth had come due. After a long pause, Emma spoke softly. "I can't change what happened, and I don't know if I can forgive it yet, but I think I understand now." Jonathan looked up, his eyes tired but hopeful. "Understand what?" he asked quietly. She smiled faintly. "That sometimes people make terrible choices thinking they're protecting what they love. It doesn't make it right, but it makes them human." Her words hung in the air, gentle but powerful. Over the following days, the story did break. News outlets ran headlines about Jonathan Hayes, the billionaire who had hidden a family tragedy for years. But instead of denying it, Jonathan did something unexpected. He faced it. He held a press conference, telling the truth in his own words. He admitted his failures, his guilt, and the mistakes that had cost him the most precious part of his life. The world was shocked, but instead of anger, something else followed. Understanding. People saw a man stripped of pride, trying to rebuild not his reputation, but his soul. For Emma, life began to shift too. She left the restaurant and started a small foundation helping children in foster care find homes. It wasn't easy, but it gave her purpose, a way to turn her pain into something good. Jonathan quietly supported her from behind the scenes, not as a billionaire trying to make amends, but as a father learning to love without conditions. One evening, months later, they met again at a small cafe by the river. The city lights reflected softly on the water. Jonathan looked older but lighter somehow. "You remind me of your mother," he said quietly. "She had your strength." Emma smiled. "And you have a lot of making up to do," she teased gently. He laughed, the sound carrying warmth that had been missing from his voice for years. As they sat there, the past no longer loomed like a shadow. The truth had hurt, but it had also healed. Emma finally had the answer she had searched for her whole life. And Jonathan finally had the chance to be the man he should have been long ago. When they stood to leave, a soft breeze brushed past them. Emma looked up at the sky, feeling peace for the first time in years. "Maybe everything happened the way it had to," she said. Jonathan nodded, his eyes shining. "Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances. It gives us the chance to make things right." As they walked away together side by side, the city lights glimmered like forgiveness itself, quiet, real, and long overdue.